Hey everybody, welcome to Board Online, Board Offline. Today we're bringing you how to play Shadows Over Normandie. Now this will be part one of a either 4 or 5 part series. There's a lot of rules in this game. The rule book is kind of a mess, and for various reasons, but we're going to do what we can to teach this game to you. And today we're just covering the component overview and the setup, and then we'll move on to gameplay with the next video, and then move on from there to things like the terrain overlays, special abilities, stuff like that. So without anything else, we're going to get down to the table, and I'm going to start teaching you how to play Shadows Over Normandie. Counters such as this one represent soldiers, as well as certain infantry units with special equipment, such as machine guns, anti-tank weapons, artillery, etc. These counters have 2 sides that contain all the information the player needs to use the unit. Most often, the front and the back represent the same unit. However, the back is generally after the unit has suffered a hit and has reduced traits. In some cases, such as machine gun teams, the 2 sides of the counter have the same number of men, but in different firing positions. This is the unit's name. This is their faction. This green outline is the standard outline. A yellow outline like this one is for officers. A red outline is for heavy weapons. And any dark color such as this is for a hero. Special abilities are found along the right edge. This icon means the unit can take a hit before being eliminated, while this icon means the unit will be eliminated when it takes another hit. These 3 shields represent different combat bonuses. This color shield is for combat bonuses against heavy vehicles. This one is against light vehicles, and this one is against infantry. Anytime you see an X, it means the unit cannot attack that type of unit, unless of course they have special equipment. This is the unit's defense, and this is the unit's movement. Light vehicles, which have counters larger than infantry, also have 2 sides. One side represents the vehicle in good working order, and the other side represents the vehicle wrecked. Once destroyed, a light vehicle becomes an obstacle, acting as a terrain overlay. Light vehicle wrecks can be removed from the terrain during the game according to certain rules, and light vehicles, when they're functioning, are marked with similar icons to the infantry. Heavy vehicles, which are also larger than the infantry, are also double-sided with one side representing the wrecked vehicle. Heavy vehicles are centerpieces on the battlefield, but players should be careful as they are vulnerable if not supported properly by infantry. Once destroyed, it becomes an obstacle acting as a terrain overlay, just like the light vehicles. And heavy vehicle wrecks also can be removed from the field during the game according to certain rules. There are a few differences in the icons on heavy vehicles, though many of them are the same. Heavy vehicles have different defenses depending on the side of the vehicle the player's attacking. Also, it has a primary weapon outlined in red and a secondary weapon outlined in yellow. The recruitment tile is the nucleus of the player's army around which all of their units will revolve. Each recruitment tile represents the heart of a platoon or even a single officer. A recruitment tile can give an extra order star, as you see here, or a special ability, usually found in the upper left corner of the tile. This is the recruitment tile's name. Any order or special ability is only granted if the slot is filled with a recruitment option. Faction insignias are found here. Breaking points represent the number of units a player must eliminate in order to gain the victory points listed on the back of the tile. This is the cost and army points it will take to use this tile in scenarios that allow the player to build their army by spending points. And this is the tile special ability that is active as long as the tile doesn't reach its breaking point. To the recruitment tile, the player will add recruitment options. These may be infantry, vehicles, and/or additional equipment. Each recruitment option has the army cost indicated on it here. Any special ability found on an option tile only benefit the unit or units on that specific option. If an equipment option, such as offensive grenades, or a character trait option, such as heroic, is added to an officer recruitment tile, and as you can see there is an officer on this recruitment tile, then it will be available to all units in the player's army. Equipment can always be used by units on the recruitment tile or by any heroes of the player's army. Each unit from a recruitment tile has access to equipment assigned to the same recruitment tile, meaning all of these units, regardless of if an officer's there, will have access to these grenades. Heroes can use any gear of the army to which they belong. The player takes the number of markers corresponding to what is shown on the equipment and places them on the recruitment option. In this case, 3. Character traits represent the specialties of certain soldiers or elite troops. Customizations such as these can only be used by characters. Characters are also the only ones that can cast spells. A character is considered the primary counter of a recruitment tile and therefore not optional. A character can be a hero or the officer of a recruitment tile. So, for the Rangers Lost Battalion, Lieutenant Edward Smith would be the character, and for Black Sun Novices, Oberlieutenant H. Gantz would be the character. Heroes are not recruitment options, but some of them cannot be enlisted without the proper recruitment tile, such as Father Ted. The terrain represents the battlefield. It is composed of terrain boards like this one, which can be arranged to create a very large number of different combinations. They also have many different elements printed on them, which will eventually cover in different videos. These elements have a tactical impact on the game. Overlays are tiles that are then placed on the terrain, such as a ruined Sherman or a building. Action cards allow the player to spice up the game and make it more dynamic. Each player has a deck of cards according to the faction they lead. Shadows Over Normandy also comes with numerous markers, which will be detailed and explained at a later time. To begin setup, take all customizations and spell tiles with this back that are not assigned to recruitment tiles and put them together in a bag or a cup or any other way that you can draw them randomly without seeing their backs. Then do the same thing with the Madness tokens. Players need to choose which scenario they'll be using. It's recommended to start with scenario 1 as the scenarios do increase in complexity as they go along. The players will need to gather up the units that are indicated in the recruitment section of the scenario and set up the terrain as shown here. Any necessary overlays are shown here, so we will need to put one out on the board. As you can see, this is the location that it goes. Here. It's also possible for players to create their own scenario using the free scenario system. This is located on page 22 and 23 of the rules, and this is something that we may get into at some video in the future, but as of right now, I'll leave this for you to discover. The player can only use cards belonging to their own faction, which in scenario 1 are these two factions. At the beginning of the game, each player will create their deck as described by the scenario. And the player cannot have more than the indicated number of cards in their hand unless a bonus tactic allows it. For instance, in scenario 1, it states that each player draws 2 cards, and therefore the player may not have more than 2 cards in their hand. Next, players set up the round counter track according to what the scenario says you should do. In this case, the Rangers are here, followed by the deep ones, and you can see the game will end in round 6. What this also means is that the Rangers will start with initiative, and then after this round, they'll move down here. So in round 2, the deep ones will have initiative, and then round 3, the Rangers will have initiative again. Once initiative has been determined, the player with initiative will deploy first, unless the scenario says otherwise. So in this case, the Rangers deploy first, and they might deploy something like this. The deployment zone is indicated in this scenario. Next, the deep ones will deploy, and their deployment zones are here and here. So they might deploy something like this. It's important when deploying to read carefully the preparation section of the scenario. As you can see, it does mention that the deep ones player must split his units into 2 groups, one of 4 units and one of 3. He deploys 1 group in each of his 2 deployment zones. When deploying a unit, it's important to deploy it with its red name face down. If neither side has a red name, the player may deploy it on whichever side they wish. A game plays out over a number of rounds determined by the scenario. If the victory condition of the scenario is reached or a player no longer has any order tokens to place on their units, then the game will end at the end of the round in progress. A player with no units or any orders has lost the game. In order to win, the player must meet the requirements presented in the scenario. For this scenario, the Rangers must get at least 4 units off this end of the board. The Deep Ones player wins if the Rangers fail to do this. That means that if the Deep Ones manage to kill 4 of the player's units, leaving only 3 behind, then the Deep Ones will have won. It's also important to pay attention to these extra blurbs in the victory conditions. So for instance, in this scenario, if Two Guns Bob manages to get off the end of the board, then he will be available to the player in the following 2 scenarios. Whereas if the Deep Ones manage to eliminate Two Guns Bob, he'll show up again imprisoned in scenario 4. Some scenarios will have objectives. Primary objectives are marked with this orange color X, and secondary objectives are marked with a yellow X. If an objective bears the marking of a particular faction, then only a member of that faction may control it. In order to control an objective, the player must be the only player to have a unit in one of the 4 adjacent spaces. If the objective is inside of a terrain overlay, then the unit must be the only unit in that overlay. And this must be the case at the end of the supply phase. If it is, then that faction controls the objective. If the player's opponent is also on the objective, it remains neutral. Even if the objective bears the symbol of a faction, the opponent can still prevent that faction from controlling it. In certain scenarios, special markers will be placed on the turn counter. They serve to remind the player on which turn an event should occur, or a particular condition must be met. These events are common to all armies, while events that have a army-specific insignia on it are specific to that faction only. When a unit is eliminated, place the token below its corresponding recruitment tile or recruitment option tile. The breaking points of a tile or option are represented by these red squares. When the number of units destroyed equals the number of red squares, the breaking point of the tile is reached. When the tile reaches its breaking point, turn over either the tile or the option involved, and the player's opponent instantly earns the points indicated when playing for points. If a destroyed unit belongs to both the tile and the option, as the scouts do, the player must assign it to the option. If the tile or option provided any special bonus, it is lost once the breaking point is reached. However, units and recruitment options such as equipment, character traits, and orders are not lost. In other words, when the second scout breaks the scouts, the third scout is still out there and may continue fighting. So there you go. That's how to play Shadows Over Normandie Part 1, the component overview as well as the general setup rules. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Please click the bell so you don't miss any future videos, subscribe to the channel, all that good stuff. And be sure to come back and check out future Shadows Over Normandie videos. We'll, of course, be bringing a gameplay at some point, and then, of course, the rest of the instructional videos as well. Until next time, if you're bored online, board offline.